My name is Rachel McGuire. I am a research director at Institute for the Future. I lead our Health Futures Lab at the Institute, and I'm delighted to be in conversation today with my colleague and friend, Jim Barnett, who is the Director of Strategic Intelligence Analysis at AARP. Jim's responsible for identifying external forces and future trends that are likely to impact AARP and its members. Jim tracks developments in sectors including technology, media, advertising, healthcare, and nonprofit management. Jim joined AARP in 2006 to help establish the Strategic Intelligence Group and has been a driving force in its evolution as the organization's lead foresight function, now known as Futurecasting. Jim and his colleagues in the Futurecasting Group have been partners with IFTF since about 2017, and I have had the good fortune of working closely with Jim on various research projects, including a customized map of the decade on the 10 disruptive forces transforming the future of AARP in 2030. And now, today, Jim has been kind enough to join me in this conversation with you all. So, hi, Jim. Thanks so much for joining us.
Hey, Rachel. Hey, everybody. Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, happy to have you. So, Jim, I'm going to assume that most people on this call know about AARP, but that may not be true for everyone, and it certainly may not be true for those who are outside of the United States. And I'm also going to assume that most don't really know all that AARP does and how it's organized. So how about we start off with just a lay of the land of AARP? What's the overarching mission of the organization and how is it organized?
Great. Okay, so I'll start with our mission statement. It's pretty simple, but it's very powerful, I think. AARP's mission is to enhance the quality of life for all as we age, leading positive social change and delivering value to members through advocacy, service, and information. So we do that. We basically, you hear about AARP, you see the brand, but we were organized as we really have three main parts of AARP. So we have the AARP Foundation, which really focuses on helping lower income seniors. That's actually organized as a 501c3. We also have AARP Services, which you see as our products and services. So our Medigap policies, for example, are offered through AARP Services, which we shorthand to ASI. And then there's AARP Inc., which is our 501c4 advocacy group. So that's where we do a lot of our work, everything from volunteering, our work in the States and on the ground, our programs like our driver education, our magazine, and also our advocacy are all through the 501c4.
Okay, and Futurecasting, how does it fit in? Where do you all fit?
Sure. So within, we actually sit in the C4, but we are responsible for doing Futurecasting for the entire enterprise. So we sit in a small group called Enterprise Strategy, which actually sits in our CEO's office. And that group is charged with setting the vision and the strategic plan for everybody. So our group just got done putting together our next 3-year strategic plan that will carry us through 2026. We're wrapping up right now. And we are part of that, and our insights helped inform that plan.
Okay, and so you're alluding to it, but maybe just to draw it more specifically, since I know we have a number of foresight practitioners on this call. What's the history of futures thinking and foresight in AARP? How did it come to be such an integral part of the strategic planning process?
So I'll just give you a really quick history of how it evolved within AARP. But I think it's actually instructive for organizations as they evolve. We actually started as a strategic intelligence group in late 2005. I joined a few months later as we were just kicking that off. And we were in the research part of AARP. And the mission then was to look outside of AARP to see what the competitive forces were, what the trends were. It was not specifically focused on the future per se, though we did think about that a lot. After a number of years, when our current CEO, Joanne Jenkins, took the helm, she wanted to have that function within her office, within strategy. So in 2015, that function, actually 2016 when it actually occurred, but that our function moved from research into enterprise strategy. So that's also was the time we took on the internal brand we call Futurecasting. I know it sounds a little bit like the weather report, but way to distinguish us within the organization. So we use that as our internal brand to help people think about the future. And our focus became more about what is coming and what's beyond even our 3-year plan than what's happening right now.
Got it. Yeah, yeah. And so in terms of the main responsibilities of the future casting team, can you share a little bit of how they're different from, say, a strategic planning team?
Sure. Well, we're part of that. We're part of the strategic plan. We informed that plan.
Okay.
Our specific role is to really understand and help the organization be responsive to the external landscape that AARP will face in coming years. So sometimes that means going really broad. Sometimes it means going kind of deep. So broadly, we continuously scan what's going on outside of AARP. We use a STEEP framework to do that, like a lot of folks do, to help interpret those signals of change. And that work turns up in a lot of ways. Like we have several weekly newsletters. I do a byline blog that goes to 400 people internally. It also shows up in things like scenario planning, which we can talk more about later. We also go deep sometimes in specific areas. So for example, right now, gaming, like online gaming, is really gaining popularity everywhere. It really took off during the pandemic. Our members love it. So we see it as a great way to connect to our audience. And really deliver on our social mission and potentially generate some revenue at some point. So last year, as an example, we developed a pretty detailed landscape of what's going on in the world of gaming, and that helped guide our strategy and our planning for that work that is under AARP Games.
Yeah, yeah. So then maybe a better question would have been, how then is future casting different from, say, the innovation team, which I imagine would also be involved in something like piloting gaming or testing out gaming experiences?
We do innovation with a capital I and with a little I. So we actually have an innovation group that also sits within the CEO's office. And that is really, it's kind of a place where things are greenhouse. They sponsor our Age Tech Collaborative, which is a place that actually brings together investors and startups that have products that are focused on the 50+ market. And these are not necessarily products that we are going to put the AARP brand on, but we just, as part of our social mission, want those to be out there in the world. So we're trying to help encourage innovation that way. And we have our own a whole group that does that and really sort of helps move that along. We do small I innovation. We don't have a team that lives at AARP. Ideally, that is something that we all do. We're all considering ourselves as innovators in aging every day.
Mm-hmm.
So when we see particular kinds of innovation that are bubbling up across the organization, we in future casting may try to help uncover those and help encourage them, help bring resources and figure out ways that that innovation can be scaled across AARP or applied in other ways across AARP. But ideally, again, that innovation is something that does not live in a specific department. We're all charged with being innovators.
Got it. So one question that I think a lot of foresight practitioners and organizations often have is, how do you work constructively with different business units? So thoughts on that? How maybe this is part of when you say you go deep on a topic, would that be in partnership with a particular business unit?
Yeah, it can be. And actually, ideally, what happens is we may find a particular trend or a particular capability we want to help develop, and we see how it applies across multiple business units. So we tend to we always try to keep that enterprise-wide view. And so we'll look at something like, say, just generically like crowdsourcing or co-creation. Where can we help develop that? And if we're trying to build that capability or product management, something like that, how can we do that in a way that benefits more than one business unit? So we sort of keep our fingers in a lot of pies, and we try to find commonalities where those needs are evident, where there's a desire to build them out. And then sometimes we might bring in other business units where they may not recognize that need, but we might say, hey, you might want to look at what's going on over here, and you might benefit from that. So it's a little bit of being asked to help by the business units. It's a little bit of us imposing ourselves into their world and trying to help them. But it's also a lot of trying to bring people together across the enterprise.
Yeah, that's interesting. So you were mentioning topics like crowdsourcing, co-creating. The other part that's interesting for us when we interact with you all is that AARP has some of the world's leading experts on topics that are central to the future of a number of things, but most notably aging, caregiving, and others. So I'm curious, as you all are developing your own perspectives, your own points of view as the future casting team within AARP, how do you work with the subject matter experts that you have on staff and in your kind of network when you're developing a point of view, say, on something like aging or caregiving?
So I just got to say, I'm always amazed by the expertise we have here within AARP. We have more PhDs here than you can shake a stick at. It's really incredible. And it's not just in one area. It's everything from, economics to gerontology, research, all kinds. So the first thing you have to do is recognize, as somebody who's a generalist like myself, that these people are going to have depths of knowledge in their area that you can only just imagine kind of where they are with all that. But you have to respect that and try to first of all sort of put yourself in their shoes a little bit. And these are people who have invested entire careers in learning about a specific thing. So the first thing we do is just try to understand the best we can, or what it is they do and where their expertise comes from. And then the next step is really just sort of being in consultation with them, that we have to figure out sort of what they know, what they're good at, what they're trying to accomplish. And then we also just have to keep in mind that this is not about SMEs at AARP, but in academia, like for example, people who get very focused on one thing become invested in a particular point of view, and they might not see trends or forces coming in from the side that could affect what it is they're working on. So we try to be those eyes and ears. So we are mostly looking for gaps in knowledge or expertise within the organization. So these are areas where we might not have an SME, but we might need to know something in particular. And then we try to figure out what those gaps are, and we try to help develop a point of view that basically calls that out, or might point the way to an area of expertise we might need to develop. I think that's probably the best way to explain it. But we always try to never outdo an SME in their area of expertise. That's just not what we do.
And why, right?
Exactly right. Yeah.
So on a practical level, what might that look like? Like, let's say you've got sort of the leading, you have some of the leading experts in the future of caregiving, particularly from sort of a demographic reality and an economic reality. So you might get their perspective, and then there may be innovations or just possible disruptions or sort of outside of the caregiving space changes that could perhaps influence the future of caregiving in a different way. And that's the work you all are bringing in. And then would you host like a conversation, or how then do you sort of integrate these two streams of content, if you will, about the future of a certain topic?
Well, it kind of depends. So, so for caregiving, for example, one of the things that our caregiving experts came to us a while back now and said, we don't fully understand is what is the mindset of an operator of a nursing home or a care facility? What are they thinking about? What are they worried about? What is their language, for example? So, because we are really focused on the caregivers, but of course, wherever it is that their loved ones are, is they need to understand that as well. And if we're going to make sure those places are well run and fit our expectations, we need to understand what the pressures are on them. So that's an example where we went out to the landscape and we did some research. We got a little bit of help from somebody who was able to do some interviews for us without saying it's AARP. But we basically did a landscape of what are the pressures on the business model, and where are the pressure points. We then brought that to the head of our caregiving group, and we basically worked with them on understanding it And in that case, he was able to take that and kind of run with it. We didn't have to do a lot more hand holding beyond that because he got what he needed in that case. In other cases, we might do a little bit more. Like we might stick with our internal stakeholder a little bit farther down the process. So that's happening a little bit in AARP games, for example, which is not caregiving, I realize, but
Yeah.
but that's a situation where we were games is not something, caregiving is something that people naturally think about AARP as being an expert in. Games, which actually have a lot of benefits just for the play of it, is not as widely recognized and is not necessarily has not been something that's been contemplated in our strategic plan. This is the importance of it. But we've been able to help infuse some of that into the strategic plan now, so that when we think about how do we engage with people, how do we help people engage across generations, that's now something that's it's more that's a little closer in. So that's another way we work with people.
Okay, that's really helpful. And then you personally, what are some of the resources that you go to, communities, events, partners, to help kind of maintain and build your own knowledge about some of these larger trends and signals that are shaping the future?
So, like a lot of folks, I do a lot of reading. We do a lot of scanning and just trying to just turn over a lot of little rocks. We do what you all do, which is we look for signals. We're looking for things that are happening in the market that might in and of themselves might not seem like much, but when you start collecting them and you put them together, it's all of a sudden like, hey, wow, I've got a pattern here. So a lot of reading, and when we read, I try to read sources that are diverse and from different diverse perspectives. I also, we also try a lot we go to conferences. We do things like and we tend to not necessarily go to SME conferences, right? So I wouldn't necessarily go to a health conference, even though I'm focused on health. I'm looking for things that impact healthcare delivery, that may not be from the health sector necessarily. So, like a lot of folks here, I go to South by Southwest every year. I always find something interesting. Austin's a great place. It's also, a great place to meet people. And I think there's, you really can't overstate the importance of human intelligence. Having a conversation with somebody who is outside of your organization, who has a different point of view, and I don't mean politically, but I mean just has just does things from a different standpoint than we do here at AARP. That's immensely helpful. So I think that's those are some of the main ways I do it. So those are also sort of like how should I say it? Like they're basically the low cost ways of doing it, relative, like just just getting out there and taking opportunities to meet people and expand your network.
Yeah. So South by Southwest, any other conference or event that comes to mind that's worth calling out by name that you like?
There are a couple others that I don't know if there's, like right now, for example, actually Procter & Gamble does something called Signal 360 that is very interesting. They do a really good job of looking into especially consumer trends. And I think that's fairly open. At one point it was open, I think, to their partners, which we're not like a business partner, but I found like that's, for example, is a good conference because it is a conference that looks across a lot of sectors, right? So that's we met some great folks there who were really expert in gaming, at a conference there. That was really fun. So I'm trying to think of some others, but I personally, nothing wrong with it. Like AARP spends a lot of time at CES. We put on quite a splash there, which we should do. But for my function, it's not as helpful because there's not as much personal interaction, not as much opportunity to meet people to have those conversations.
Yeah. You seem to also often have really good signals from financial services, and sort of the intersection of health and financial services that are always helpful for me when we exchange signals. I don't know, you get a newsletter or something, I think.
Well, we do scan. We actually have a service that does scanning for us on a weekly basis, and it's something that I personally curate. So it's not something that is automatically generated, which I find not as helpful. We have those here at AARP, which, and again, those are great for what they do. But I'm looking, when I'm for my internal stakeholder audience, I'm looking for things that have the potential to shift things. Like, what's driving the Medicare Advantage market, for example? What's the role of technology there? And so when I do my scan, which I then share with an internal stakeholder audience, that's what I'm looking for. And people, it's interesting, people, will even tell me, like, I feel like you're talking to me, even though I don't have my name on it, I'm not writing anything for it, I'm just sharing articles. They come with a point of view.
Yeah.
And the 100 or so people who subscribe to that weekly scan, know that's what's coming, and they know that what they get is going to be something that will be interesting to them.
Yeah, you provide that, like, for those on the call that are familiar with IFTF's what so what kind of approach to signals, you often provide that so what piece for people. So like you're doing that extra step to say, here's an interesting signal out there, and here's an interpretation for why it matters for us, at least to spark the conversation.
Right, absolutely.
Somebody on the chat, someone has already told they play the AARP game, so they're delighted to hear that there's so much intent behind them. But someone's now asking if you could share the name of the scan service that you just referenced.
We use a company called LAC. They're out of Canada. I think they were just purchased by somebody else. I can't remember the name, so I'm not going to say it. But yeah, they're still operating as LAC Group.
So I thought it'd be interesting for people, we just talked briefly about some of the collaborations that we've worked on together, or that IFTF and AARP Futurecasting team have worked on together. There's a recent one around some scenarios that we could touch on. And then there's the map of the decade we did on the 10 disruptive forces. So I don't know, where do you want to start?
Well, I will say, we're still using the scenarios we did with you all. So I can talk about that a little bit if it. So
let's start with the scenarios. Yeah.
So I've taken I took the training on alternative futures, which was fantastic. It was really helpful, and I feel like I got a great grounding in the methodology. What we did for our planning here, and actually for a board meeting later, we did 4 scenarios that didn't exactly fit the alternative scenario framework, but they definitely had two dimensions. And what we wanted to do is we had a lot. We try to be aware in our own team here of our own. We're embedded in AARP. We have a point of view that is informed by that, and it isn't always easy to step away from it. So we went to IFTF, and you all were great. You basically gave us starter scenarios, if you will, about kind of what the world would look like in the year 2030, and they were helpful because they were not informed by our experience at AARP. Right,
like outside in.
Right, exactly. We really needed that, but once we had that, we were able to layer in the things that we think about maybe more on a day-to-day basis, like healthcare delivery. Or financial security, those kinds of things, and so from those, we went back and forth with you all a couple of times. But then after that, we probably spent a couple of months massaging and reworking those scenarios in a couple of different ways, and then use them to help people think about their strategies and their tactics for the next 3 years. And that from there, we were able to identify the most important implications for AARP as enterprise. What do we need to work on? What do we need to be more focused on and more mindful of? Where do we need to have a mindset shift? What are some operational considerations? So we're still pretty much in working on those and working through them. But it was a great collaboration, and the collaboration was in some ways just gain the benefit of all your experience for outside of AARP, working with you directly, and then being able to build on top of that internally.
Yeah, it was almost like we were providing the scaffolding of a future scan to just make sure, like, if you drop into, was it 2035? Was that the year, or was it 2030.
I think we had 2030, but maybe it was 2035. It was 2035.
It was like, if we drop into it, what
Yeah.
are sort of the conditions that are
Right.
dominant in these different scenarios? And then you all came in with much more like customized or intentional aspect levers that you wanted to play out in something like healthcare delivery, or, to sort of spark conversation. Why did you all go with scenarios in this case? Why did you think that was the right futures tool to use?
Well, one, it stretches thinking, which is part of our remit on at future casting. But two, by going through that process, you're able to surface a couple of things. One is what are some things you need to do under any scenario, right? So like if the world goes this way, you have to do this. If the world goes that way, if it's the same thing, well, you better get to it. Regardless. But then also it helps you identify sort of what risk appetite you'll need to have in those various worlds, and also if there's a world in which you need certain capabilities or need to focus on certain things that's only in that one scenario, and you ignore it, that's a risk there, right? Because if the world kind of evolves that way, or even partially that way, you're not entirely prepared for it, So, and also the other thing too is, the thing about scenarios is like people tend to associate them with doom and gloom in some ways, and a lot of them can be sort of downers. But in the case of the ones we developed, there was one that was fairly optimistic, in which we had a lot of winds at our back, and so. Then the question became, okay, well, if you're not spending all your energy fighting things, what do you want to do? Like, what would you, if you were free to do things and really innovate, and you had all these people helping you out, what does that look like? And then it's we hadn't really thought about that until we're so focused on, fighting disinformation, or trying to get a coalition together for an advocacy campaign, that it just forces you to sort of, be ready in ways you might not otherwise.
Yeah, it's shaping the future you want while mitigating the future you don't want. Yeah, that's an interesting insight. It's being asked, someone's asking if these are publicly available, these scenarios. My guess is they are not.
No, those are proprietary,
Yeah, perhaps at some point, some element of them may be shared.
Well, but also, you all do scenarios all the time, and I think the frameworks are. I don't know. I haven't checked on the ITF website, but not specific to us, but the kind of frameworks you all do and the 4 different scenarios you give the training are super helpful, and that's the basis for a lot of what we did.
Thank you. That's nice of you to say. I'm glad that it helped you all. And then we did a map together. The years start to blur together in this post-pandemic world, but it was right before COVID, right? 2018, 2019.
We finished 2018. Yes, that's right. Yeah.
And what was the original interest in creating a map of the decade for AARP? Do you remember?
Well, we want to have, this was right after the future casting team had sort of been minted, if you will. And what we wanted to do was a couple of things. One, we just wanted to have, it was a calling card in some ways. Like, look, this is a handy tool you can put in your pocket, and you can take it to a meeting, and you can actually use it without us being there. But beyond that, I think what it did for the future casting team, and also for AARP, was it very neatly put together in a digestible way what are the big forces we're contending with, because we hadn't done that, So there were, I'm trying to remember all the names of them. I should have a copy of it here, but I don't right in front of me. But basically, it was, we were able to articulate the 10 forces that were just is going to impact everything we do, and not just. And some are more important in health, or some are more important in financial security. But they were all right there, and it's held up very well. In fact, we're thinking about refreshing it. We've talked about that just because it's been 5 years, but we've been really proud of, wow, we kind of nailed it. This is how the world sort of played out over the last 5 years. So it was a really helpful tool. And I should mention that on the back of it, we had a couple. We just sort of had some starter questions you could use, and so it was a way of just trying to help spread futures thinking across AARP in a really simple way.
Yeah, I mean, I was really impressed by your level of collaboration. You know, it wasn't a situation where you sort of contracted us to create this outside in view of the 10 forces that could disrupt or shape AARP's future. It really was a collaboration between IFTF's research team and the future casting team at AARP. And I think that's in part why it has held up so well, because there was a balance of what we were seeing from the outside and what you were seeing internally that was sort of shaping these, excuse me, these forecasts. But it was interesting to see that the unintended consequence that you just identified there of your team actually developing a shared narrative about the future, that by sort of getting in the trenches and doing that work, you all really embodied it, because it forced you all to say, you know, do we agree? Is this our shared understanding? And so I think that wasn't the intent of it, but watching that sort of emerge was super interesting to see.
Yeah, and that was a lot of the value of it, I think, was not just for us personally, you know, individually, but but because we were invested in it, it was a point of view, and we were able to explain it to other people at AARP, and then that became it took on a little more of a life of its own. But I think it was a lot of work, but it was well worth it, because it was something that became that really kind of embedded in all of our work beyond that. And so those forces that we identified turn up in lots of things since then. So it wasn't a one and done by any stretch. It really did sort of shape our thinking as a team for a long time.
Yeah. And then I did get the chance to participate in some of those follow-up workshops. And that was interesting too, to see, you know, when you brought in, again, the subject matter expertise and had them sort of organize themselves within this very landscape view of the future. That also was super interesting to see those conversations and what would be sparked when they kind of had the opportunity to zoom out and think about the future more holistically. Well, my sense, without being able to poll the audience, is that I imagine a number of people on this call are feeling some level of envy about how supported foresight work is at AARP. My understanding is a lot of people are doing the function of foresight on their own or with a very small team. So I guess this is going to be sort of a two-part question, but let me start with the first part, is sort of what's the secret to the staying power of a strong forecasting team at the organization at AARP?
Well, I think partly was where we sit. I mean, it was a long journey, but I think being embedded in strategic planning, we're a necessary part. We've become embedded in that process. And so I think that's, it wasn't easy to get there. I mean, I worked in this group for 10 years before we became part of the process. But I think now that that's happened, and, you know, we've had, you know, it's been recognized externally from AARP, the contributions of it. I think that's the staying power. I think, at least that's, you know, knock on wood. I think now that we've sort of, you know, climbed that mountain, there's no need to go back down it. But I think also, you know, we try to continually take stock. So I think, you know, like at the end of the year, by the way, it's just 3 of us on the team. It's just not a big team at all. But we go to our internal clients, and we'll do a satisfaction survey every year. It's like 8 or 9 pretty straightforward questions, and we ask them to rate us on a 1 to 10. And usually you get, you know, it's nice to oh yeah, like interesting that the project we did, I didn't realize this helped that much, or we could have done better here. Huh. But it's always, you know, it's continual improvement. We're always trying to work on. So I think that's a part of the equation, you know, as well, is that you really just need to just keep asking people, you know, what do you see as the value, and then work on those things. And then the other thing, Shelly, it's a small thing, but, you know, we just try to be present in various ways. So actually today, before I came to this webinar, we are hosting an external speaker at a luncheon. We have a lunch and learn, and yeah, maybe you know, it's probably maybe 30 to 40 people showed up for it. We also broadcast internally, and I realize that's not something that everybody can do, but just to have that kind of openness to the function, I think, is helpful. People talk about it afterwards. Especially if it's an engaging speaker, and you know, you can always find a good speaker. I mean, like, if you try, I think in an area that's of interest to your audience. And then just sort of simple things like I mentioned, like the weekly scan I do, like around healthcare, for example, that I put out. That's something where people come to and to expect it. And then I also, I mentioned I'm a former journalist, so this comes easily for me. And I realize it might not for others, but I write a weekly blog, and it's like 600 to 700 words. It's conversational. It takes a signal, and it basically says, here's the bigger meaning behind this. And it goes out usually every week, and so people read that, and again, they feel like I'm talking to them, even though it goes to like 400 people in the building. And I think that's a way we stay connected to people, and especially the leadership of AARP. That is helpful, and I think helps maintain our staying power.
Yeah, is it fair to say that the culture at AARP is that the future is not a nice to have? It's central. It's a critical point that deserves attention and time and resources.
Yeah, I would say so, especially at the highest levels, and that's the most important thing. And I think that sense of it, that valuation of it, that starts with Joanne Jenkins, our CEO, and just goes through our E-team and to our structure. It's our hierarchy. That definitely does. I don't want trickle down is not the right word, but it makes it easier for it to flow throughout the organization. So we aren't always having to push up. So we are very fortunate because a lot does depend on having great leadership, which we do. So I'm proud to say that Joanne's just been a great proponent of the function, and she gets it. She understands the value of future thinking, and she's seen it. So that's a good thing. And not everybody gets that, I realize, but if they do, it's just hang on to it.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because you would think, well, I mean, if people are thinking, well, of course, you're AARP, you have to have a long-term view, but I would gently argue that, many organizations that should have a long-term view and maybe have it in their vision or their mission don't necessarily have it in practice. So it's not given. It's not a given that just because your mission suggests a long-term vision that the capacity is there internally to actually operate with that mindset.
Yeah, and I got to say also, it's our structure. We're a nonprofit. We're an advocacy organization. We don't have to turn a profit for our shareholders. And I realize a lot of folks have that pressure constantly, and it's hard to show ROI in a year or two. And in fact, we even had discussions about things we did 2, 3, or 4 years ago that are only now bearing fruit.
Yeah.
That happens a lot. So that's much harder in a for-profit setting than a nonprofit setting, for sure.
Yeah, that's a nice assessment. That's probably very true. So I'm going to open it up for questions. I'll be looking in the chat. I think that's where I'm supposed to look for questions. So please feel free to ask. This is your opportunity to get good advice from Jim Barnett. And maybe I'll just, while we're waiting for some questions to come in, what advice, other than what you've already shared, which has been very helpful, is there anything else you would suggest or help guide people as they're trying to build out a foresight effort within their organizations, or maybe as an independent consultant or in their own practice?
Sure. I mean, maybe I just kind of recap some things we talked about already, but I think what's really helpful is really build and maintain that external network. I mean, it's just absolutely invaluable to have to be able to plug into other people's thinking, smart people who you met along the way. That's just really has helped me so much. And again, that's a bit of a holdover from my previous life as an investigative newspaper reporter. You need people who I call tour guides, right? We need to learn about something, whether it's about gaming or about it's insurance sales or things like that. You need somebody who can say, look, this is how it works. That's a really helpful thing. So I think keep those people close. And I think also it's really helpful to, in terms of developing the function internally and getting the support for it, it really helps to have ways that, find ways that you can show your value to a number of people. I mean, I think most organizations will have like a newsletter or may have some kind of internal organ or something you can borrow space in to show up. And it may be that may be a way to then host a lunch and learn, but something you can do to sort of just just plant some seeds, right? I think that's really helpful. And then, and I think lastly, this is a longer term goal, but the change I've seen with our function moving from basically a business unit and research into the enterprise strategy group into planning with that advises our CEO, it's made all the difference in the world. So if you're not there, maybe think about a way to. It might take a while, but maybe think about ways that you can be closer to that. Like help embed that your function within that work that goes on in the strategy and the planning of your organization.
Yeah, no, I think that's very, very helpful. It may seem difficult for people initially, but you're saying over the long term, consider where you sit in the organization as a critical piece of how effective you can be.
I mean, I've seen it both ways, and it just is, and that's sort of the way the world works. You can be effective. It's not to say you can't be effective, not in that role, but I think it's just the way that it's more easy to plug in.
Yeah, when you have that runway. Okay, so we've got a couple questions coming in that are still around just strategic foresight within the organization. Then some people are looking for some direct comments about AARP and future of aging kind of topics. So let's tackle the sort of role of foresight first, and then we'll get into some of the content. So Bruce is asking if you think bringing strategic foresight into the business units as a visible practice has influenced AARP's messaging, both magazine and digital, to the target community about how to think about our future and the future beyond us.
I'm trying to think of a specific example, but I have to say yes, simply because I talk to the editors of our magazine, pretty frequently. We exchange ideas. It's been a while since I don't remember what's the last one, but things like I'm trying to think what's a good example there. Nothing's coming to mind, but definitely, the folks who edit and write our magazine and our bulletin, they're thinking about the future too. So we tend to have a lot of conversations about things. So I think if we think of that as the messaging, then absolutely, we're plugged into that. I think we're always looking. Our CEO is always talking about the future, always thinking about it. So I'm sure it turns up in subtle ways also in terms of the messaging. That may not be glaring, but are definitely present.
Yeah, it'd be interesting. Like you'd almost have to go back to see, prior to when strategic foresight was an deliberate and intentional aspect, because It does feel like part of being in the aging space is trying to get people to connect with their future self, whether you're doing that systematically and deliberately or just through branding.
Sure, we have tools to help you do that. So that's a good example. We actually have we have Money Map, which helps you do precisely that. So that's not something we had 5 years ago.
Yeah. See just how poor you'll be. Okay, and then Kelly is commenting that she's just amazed at how the company execs invite these alternative perspectives and external insights. Was there ever resistance to this? And have you had any struggle getting people to look up from the present to think longer term?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. So I'm sure we'll talk about the easy parts of it, with our top leadership, but in the business units, we have, I don't want to, this is not criticism of anybody in particular, but we have a business model that is very much from the legacy world, from before digital. So getting people to think differently is hard. And so, for example, we come from, we grew up in sort of the broadcast era, right? We have all this great information. We want to pump it out. We often know what's best here. We want to tell you what's best. And so you can learn from it. And so that's not how the world works so much anymore. There's a lot of, everything from, rating, like from customer ratings that are evident right now. They're easy to see. So I've bumped into, believe me, I've bumped into many times when I've put out an idea or written something or suggested something that just absolutely collides with somebody's idea of what the world is and what it should be. And you try. It's a what we do is about persuasion. So we definitely try to deliver our point of view in a way that people can hear it. That's very important. You don't want to be, in an adversarial relationship with anybody, internally. But there are times when, you look at what's going on in your organization, and again, it's not a personal thing, but just the way the place is set up, it makes people do certain things. You have certain incentives that make you want, that reward you for doing certain activities, but those activities might not necessarily get you to 2030 or 2035.
Yeah. I mean, because you're rarely saying what we're doing now is great and will continue to be great. I mean, there's very little value in a future casting team spreading the gospel that this is how the future will look like the present. Keep doing what you're doing.
You're doing
fine.
So
it's almost like what you're saying is going to agitate the present in a way that may agitate in a positive way, where people say, good, I can't wait to stop doing this. But it is an agitation in terms of it requires energy to go somewhere else if we're going to take action on this.
And it's worth just calling out. That's hard. I mean, that's hard, especially in a lot of organizations. I mean, there's not necessarily I get rewarded for it. My, part of my remit, my job description is about sort of disrupting, the status quo or certain mindsets. But that's not true for everybody else. And that can be very hard to do that within an organization. So sometimes it's easier to bring people in from outside who have that same message. That's why we often call on you all, but other people can say, hey, this is what we're seeing outside. And sometimes, it's you can help. One way to deliver a message internally is to bring somebody from the outside in and have them do it rather than you say it yourself, because that can, you can get stomped on if you're not careful.
There's also perhaps the argument that by taking a 10-year lens, or at least a longer term lens, it's a preparation question as opposed to the house is on fire moment where change has to happen. So there's an argument, at least, that we're giving people time to think through a thoughtful reaction and response to a changing environment.
Right. Well, that's definitely it's always you always want to give people a sense of urgency, right? And so, so that's something we are definitely trying to do. But what I have found is we have these 3-year plans, and if you're talking about something that's after that horizon, it's okay. But if you're messing with their 3-year plan that they would spend all the time on, that's not over very well. But if it's go beyond that horizon. And 3 years is is really not that far away when you think about it. You can see 3 years from right now in a lot of cases. You can't predict everything. Obviously, COVID is exhibit A there, but you can definitely. But by couching that way, people can be more receptive than they might otherwise.
Yeah, no, that's helpful. Thank you. Okay, now a couple questions about sort of the areas that you're looking into. So Alyssa's curious about one of the more or most surprising signals or trends that you're looking into right now around seniors, to provide an example of how AARP does this work.
Surprising. Well, I guess it's not. I haven't really been surprised, I think, but one thing I think is actually has been very we've traveled down this path. I've mentioned gaming and the work we've done there during the pandemic. That was a way that people connected across generations. When they couldn't spend Christmas together. A lot of people turned to gaming, and we have the technology for it now, so people were able to spend time interacting in a fairly carefree way, around something that was fairly simple, but they could be engaged in it. So it's not so much like getting on the phone, like, how are you? So it's a different kind of sort of a venue. And so we've really taken that to heart. Again, our AARP Games folks are hard at work looking for ways we can, expand that offering. And I'm saying this because when I first learned about how much receptivity there was amongst our members, I was surprised by that. I really was. But as time has gone on, it's becoming clearer and clearer. That's a really good bet for us. So I
mean,
think that's an example there.
and it's interesting too, right? Because I remember in the 2000, I don't know, 2010 phase, gaming and health was a very popular topic, and AARP was very involved in it. So it's interesting to think that an organization can have the vision, like the forecast or the foresight on a topic, but it sounds like the user research then, when the actual user behaviors started changing, that is another really important piece of studying the future, to say, now we may have anticipated this, then outside events like a pandemic created, the sort of change in the behaviors. And now we're sort of ready to go with with like how we're going to react. It wasn't like the first rodeo for AARP to see that
No.
gaming was a popular activity for seniors and for families.
The other thing that changed too is the folks who, like the Pong generation, basically has since come into our demographic. And that's the other thing too. Is, the people who are well into their second decade of membership in AARP were playing games as kids, on TV sets. So it's also timing as well.
That's true.
So and actually, just generally, I should also say generally, maybe this is not a surprise, but people who are in our demographic are really good with technology. I mean, like it's not like it used to be. People have had, a lot of them have had in the workplace. A lot of them are now have it with their kids or their grandkids. So it's not the barrier. I mean, the use of it or the openness to it is not the barrier it once was.
Yeah, right. So that's another reason why you got to keep moving, right? Because nothing's static. So Libby's offering you a good idea that AARP could offer futures thinking scenario games that help families plan for the future of their senior members. How will we help our parents navigate growing older? How will we as children respond? What do we need to prepare for? It's almost like simulations of future lifestyles. Yeah, thank you, Libby. Okay, and then we did get a question about sort of more of a global lens on this. Someone's asking, how can the work and ideas of AARP help the situation for the aging populations in other countries, especially places with much harsher economies like Pakistan?
So we tend to be pretty focused on the U.S. We do spend some time. We do have a unit that looks abroad. And looks at what's happening in global aging and sort of the demo, what's going on out there. Within future, so we have. I'm just saying we do have experts who do this who I'm not going to match. But one of the things I will say that I think is really interesting is we spent a lot. You and I have talked about this, and I've spent a lot of time in my own career just looking at digital identities. Like how do we navigate the internet? We need better business models to make that work better. So we're seeing, like right now, we're seeing a little bit of promise perhaps in some of what's going on with Web3. And it's interesting, there was actually a panel at Davos back in January that talked about digital wallets and how basically being able to give people a wallet where they have identities that they own as opposed to just occupying like they do on Facebook. Is a way to help people in places where the economies are not as developed. It's a way for them to own digital assets. So I think there's a lot of promise there. It's not something we're like hugely going after. We try to keep up. We definitely try to keep up with what's going on in the world. But this is just me talking. I think there's a lot of promise there to help. First of all, everybody, but also particularly older folks who don't have as much. It's a way to, help them, reach the benefits that they have earned or they are entitled to in their countries. It's a way to help spread banking as well for the underbanked. There's definitely a lot of promise there.
Okay, and just on a practical level, on your website, are there links that connect to more globally related topics or more universal topics like that of identity and digital assets and that sort of thing?
That's some work I do. The digital identity and assets are things I do for future casting, which is more internally focused. But I have not been to it for a while, I confess. But we do have a group that looks globally, and I'm sure they have a presence on our website. I don't know precisely what they link to it at this particular moment.
Okay. Do you know the group's name by chance?
It was called, we have a group called Thought Leadership. It's under there. We have just an international division. I have to look it up to get the actual official title of it.
Okay, and we can try to track it down
I
too
can-
and share
I can,
on the
I'll
link.
get along. Okay.
So we are almost at time. I'm just going to pause while Jim looks this up to see if there's anyone for one final question. Otherwise, I'm going to go ahead and share about our next presentation, our next event, which will be on, let's see if I can do this, August 17th at 9 a.m. Pacific with Pupil Biest. I hope I got that right, who's the director of Foresight N Square. And with that, I'll look forward to seeing you all at the next Foresight talk presented by Institute for the Future. And I will thank Jim Barnett for sharing some of his time and expertise with all of us today, and wish you all a great rest of your day. Thanks, Jim.
Thanks, Rachel. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye.